Hello, my name is Victor Aguilar, and I work for the European University Foundation. And throughout this presentation, I will show you what Erasmus Without Paper is, how you can join the network, and give you the latest updates of what is going on in the digitalization of the workflows in the Erasmus program. Now you can see there that this presentation was meant to take place on the 13th of March. We're making it available for you online, and I hope that you can follow everything that I will be saying as of the next slide. The title of this presentation is Erasmus Without Paper Possible? Well, I have a very short answer for that, and the answer is not only is it possible, but it's already taking place. So there are two numbers there that actually have an important meaning. The number on the left is number 15, and that is the number of months that have passed since the Erasmus Without Paper network went live. And it was officially launched in Ghent at a conference that some of you may have attended in December 2018. Now, the number on the right, the number 12, that is the number of months that have elapsed since the European Commission announced the timeline for the digitalization of the program. And in that timeline, the Commission made it explicit that the use of the Erasmus Without Paper network will gradually become mandatory for all the holders of the Erasmus Charter for higher education. So beginning in 2021, inter-institutional agreements and online learning agreements will become mandatory. Then the next year, the nominations and acceptances of students, and finally in 2023, the transcripts of records. Of course, this timescale depends on the tools being fit for purpose, and this is exactly where we are right now, collecting a lot of the feedback that users of these tools have and incorporating it to make them better and the very best possible solution that we can offer. Now, I just want to say a couple of words about the European University Foundation, which is an alliance of universities in Europe that work together for the modernization of the European higher education area. We have 5 basic pillars that we work on: quality, mobility, employability, digital higher education, policy innovation, and active citizenship. Now, lately, well, before I go there, I'll just show you very quickly the network of universities that we have at the moment. These are our full members. These are our associate members, and they amount to a total of, a little more than 50 universities. We have to update these slides constantly because the network keeps on growing. But what all these universities have in common is that they are proactive, they are innovative, and we all work together trying to modernize the European higher education area. Now, going back to our 5 pillars, lately we have been focusing a lot on the digital higher education. And the reason there is important. Most of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with the Erasmus program, which was born in 1987. And of course, throughout the years, it grew and grew. In 2014, 7 programs were merged into what today is Erasmus+. In 2017, the program celebrated its 30th anniversary, and by then 9 million participants had already benefited from an Erasmus experience from 33 different countries that are the program countries of Erasmus. And the next program is set to become even bigger, more ambitious, larger, and to at least double its budget. Of course, the negotiations with the European Council, the Parliament, and the European Commission are still ongoing, so the final result is yet to be decided. But one thing is clear: the program will get more money, and the program will get bigger. This also means more student exchanges. And you can see on this slide what the expectation is. So the next program is meant to help some 12 million people go abroad for an experience in a different country. Now, the problem is that since the Erasmus program was launched back in 1987, the basic procedures that allow universities to exchange student information have remained largely the same. So to a great extent, these are still paper-based, and that represents a very high workload for international relations officers or any staff at universities working with student mobility. And that is where Erasmus Without Paper comes into play. So back in 2015, I believe a group of universities started bouncing off ideas on how to make this a little easier for students. This data that I'm showing you there comes from a 2017 survey, desk research that the European University Foundation carried out. This was after the changes in the program were introduced in 2014, when the program merged the 7 parallel programs that existed before that were working on different lines, like higher education, adult education, vocational education and training, youth, etc. So we asked people whether the changes introduced in 2014 had any impact in the administrative workload of universities. And you can see there that more than 2/3 of respondents said that the administrative workload had increased significantly. This other graph just digs a little bit deeper into this issue and shows that almost half of the participants consider that this workload is very high, and pretty much the other half says that it's high. So it's almost 9 out of 10 people working on in higher education, in international relations offices, who think that the workload surrounding the management of Erasmus Plus mobilities is a little bit too high. So this gave us the impetus to actually start working on solutions that could simplify this, cut the red tape, and decrease the administrative workload. And that implies Erasmus going digital, and it implies switching from paper-based procedures to digitized ones. Now, the aim here is to have the whole mobility cycle digitized. So from the moment that a student applies for mobility through Erasmus Plus till the moment that the university that sends the student reports back to the European Commission through the Mobility Tool Plus. So the idea is that all ECHE holders will be able to exchange in a safe and streamlined way student-related information amongst them. And here I just want to present to you the general idea behind this. So to simplify things and to make them digital, there will be a single entry point for institutions and a single entry point for students. So the single entry point for institutions is via the Erasmus Without Paper network. The single entry point for students is through the Erasmus Plus mobile app. I will tell you a little bit more about these two tools later on, but basically once students or international relations officers, IROs, are inside the network, they have access to different tools that help them exchange student information. One of them, as you can see below, is the online learning agreement. Another one is the Inter-Instituional Agreement Manager, which you may have heard of already and that I will explain further down. And of course, Mobility Tool Plus. And again, the roadmap that the Commission has established. And just as a little disclaimer, every slide that you see here with the logo of the European Commission means that it has been borrowed from the European Commission. The slides that have the EUF logo are the slides that come directly from us. Before going into more detail, I want to briefly tell you about the European Student Card Initiative. Some of you may have already heard about this initiative, which is led by the European Commission, more specifically by the Directorate General for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture. So despite the initiative having the word student card in it, it isn't really about deploying a single student card in Europe. The European Student Card Initiative is much more ambitious. The European Student Card Initiative is mostly about connecting systems and setting standards for the secure exchange of data. It's about establishing the single entry points that I told you about a little earlier for both mobility coordinators and students to manage all the key steps of their mobilities. And finally, rolling out a European Student eID for higher education. And of course, in this sense, and you can see there the quote unquote, rolling out a European student card would actually means adding a European symbol to existing student cards, which is what you see there in the representation. So basically, higher education institutions who are already issuing their cards, they can add a little hologram by connecting to the European Student Card platform. But the whole initiative, it's rather bringing together different bottom-up projects such as Erasmus Without Paper, the Erasmus app, the European Student Card project, and MyAcademicID to make this possible. So at the end of the day, the aim is that all these projects will work together to eventually achieve the main goal of the European Student Card Initiative, which is what the Commission calls the European Education Area. So it's this vision where spending time abroad to study and learn is actually the norm, where diplomas and qualifications gained abroad are automatically recognized across the European Union, where every citizen speaks at least 2 languages in addition to their mother tongue, and where educational excellence is a reality for all. And of course, on top of that, students having a strong sense, and people in general, of their identity as Europeans. Now, back to Erasmus without paper. Erasmus without paper, in a nutshell, is basically a network that enables interoperability and facilitates the safe exchange of student data between universities. The main goal is to interconnect all the almost 6,000 holders of the Erasmus Charter for higher education and allow them to digitize the key steps of their mobility workflows. The network allows coordinators to also send messages and reminders to students that they get through the Erasmus Mobile App, and to manage inter-institutional agreements online, learning agreements online, nominations and transcripts of records online. And at the end of the day, automatically export all of that to the Mobility Tool Plus. So some of these things are still in development, some of them are already available for use, but the main aim is that by the end within the next Erasmus program, mobility coordinators will be able to benefit from all these things, and by the end of the program, that all the key steps will have been digitized. In a sense, the Erasmus Without Paper network is a sort of telephone line. It allows universities to communicate with one another and understand each other. So it sets standards and it simplifies things for them. When we were carrying out the desk research back in 2017, one of the things that we wanted to know is how universities manage their student mobilities. So we wanted to come up with a solution that actually would fit everyone and that would leave no one behind. So this graph shows the answers that they gave back then. So it turns out that almost half of the universities don't have specific IT tools to manage their mobilities, whereas a third of them have systems that have been developed in-house, and only 20% use a commercial third-party service provider. So there was a lot of diversity in the solutions that universities have in place to manage mobility, and we wanted to take that into account to deploy a plausible solution. Going back to borrowing slides from our colleagues in the European Commission, that's exactly what we tried to do. We tried to cater for the different needs of the institutions to make sure that they could all interoperate and benefit from the same standards. So I very much like the picture on the left, which shows coffee. Most people like coffee, but of course you drink it in a different way, right? Some of you like coffee just the normal way, nothing added. Some of you like it with a little bit of milk, and some of you just prefer milk on its own. So it's the same way with Erasmus Without Paper. No matter what your solution for managing student mobility are, you can connect to the network. So if you have an in-house developed system, or you subcontract that to a third-party service provider, or you don't have any tools at all, there will be a way for you to connect to the network. And this is what I want to show you right now. The first case is where you have your own IT system. So you have it developed in-house and you want to connect it to the network. Well, that's great. All you need to do is involve your IT team, connect your system directly to the Erasmus Without Paper network, and implement the required connectors or APIs. So that is something that your IT team would be able to help you with. And I want to present to you some useful links that your IT team can follow to get the necessary information and the step-by-step checklist that they will need to follow in order to connect your university IT system to the Erasmus Without Paper network. So there you have links to the Competence Centre, the Developers Hub, GitHub, and what we call this Open Source University Alliance, which is basically a platform for universities to share their open source solutions. So you don't have to start from scratch. So if you want to reuse some of the work that has been done by some of your partner universities, you can go there and use what they have done before. Now, the second case is where you use a third-party service provider to manage your student mobilities. Well, in this case, it's also possible to connect to the Erasmus Without Paper network. The Erasmus Without Paper project has been working with the largest service providers in Europe from the very beginning to make sure that their needs were taken into account and that they are aware of the digitalization of the Erasmus program. So in this case, you would only need to reach out to your service provider, verify that your Erasmus Without Paper connection is already active, and urge them, in case they haven't, to implement the necessary functionalities. This is just a slide to show you the partners that we have been working very closely with during the different Erasmus Without Paper rounds. You can see there MoveOn, SOP, UNIT, Chinica, Sigma. So just reach out to them, ask them if they are already connected to the network. These ones are. Ask yours if that is the case as well. Now, the third scenario is where your university doesn't have a specific IT system to deal with student mobilities. Well, in that case, you don't have to worry. It's also fine because we have built an IT tool for you, and that one is called the Erasmus Dashboard. You can see that the Erasmus Dashboard, you can already find it online, and it's a solution for those universities without suitable IT tools. It doesn't require any specific IT knowledge. It's cloud-based. It's, as the rest of the Erasmus Without Paper network, it's public infrastructure and therefore is free of charge. So all you need to do is create an account. And what's even best, it's already integrated with the OnLearn agreement and the Erasmus Plus mobile app, so that mobility coordinators can immediately start communicating with students and send them useful reminders. The steps here are also very straightforward. You go to the Erasmus Dashboard website, you register. It's important that you do it with your institutional credentials because there is manual verification there from the side of the Erasmus Dashboard Consortium, which you can see below the logo, to verify that the person requesting access actually works for a university, and not only for a university, but for the International Relations Department or the unit dealing with student mobility. So you have to be a little bit patient when waiting for validation. It takes a couple of days, but as soon as you are allowed to go into the network, then you all have to do is sign in. You can start delegating access to your colleagues in the International Relations Office and start exchanging student data with your partner universities. Now, this is just a little graph to show you the growth of the number of registered universities in the Erasmus Without Paper network. By the end of last year, 2019, we had almost 1,500 universities registered there. The aim is, of course, to reach to as many universities as possible in the shortest delays. So I'm happy to give you these numbers. And because this presentation was tailored for universities in the UK, I would also like to show you what the proportion of ECHE holders within the UK already connected to the dashboard is. So 43% is the latest statistic. You could say, that is not so great. Well, of course, it could be better. We would be very happy if it were 100. But when you look at the total number of universities that are connected, then you can see that the UK is actually in 4th place. So, of course, the Germans have the lead there in absolute numbers, right? Spain is also ahead. There's a very big countries within the Erasmus program, a lot of universities exchanging students. France is number 3. The UK, well, you are not doing so bad there. So just some numbers for you to digest. And it goes without saying that we have a competence center, and the competence center offers all the necessary information for you to understand exactly how to connect. On the left, you can see that within the section of Erasmus Mobility Coordinators, there is detailed sections for the 3 use cases that I presented before: in-house developed software, third-party managed software, and the Erasmus Dashboard. So all the essential information is there. I urge you to visit the website, of course, and check the technical documentation available, the video tutorials, and the FAQs for mobility coordinators. And if you have any further questions, of course, through the Competence Center, you can always reach out to us. I'm not sure what happened there, but let me get back to the presentation. I'll just find the right slide. Speaking of technology, usually there is a little glitch somewhere. that can be improved. And we're back on track. So this is, I just told you about the Erasmus Without Paper, which is a single entry point for mobility coordinators. Now I want to turn for a second to the single entry point for students, which is the Erasmus Plus mobile app. Some of you may have heard already about the app. It was launched within the framework of the 30th anniversary campaign of the Erasmus program in 2017. And initially, it was thought of as a way to give students useful information about the Erasmus program, to get them useful and fun tips from other Erasmus participants, and so that they could have them at their fingertips. But very quickly, we realized that this app also had the potential to become something bigger, something a little bit more useful. So it could be the entry point for students to start applying for their Erasmus exchange. And that is precisely the aim that we have now. So what the app allows students to do now, and what has allowed them for since 2017, is that it presents to them with step-by-step checklists to guide them during their exchange abroad. It has a connection with the online learning agreement, so they can sign and complete their learning agreements online. It allows students to receive push notifications from their international relations office, also useful tips from other Erasmus participants, and of course information on events and activities in their host institution and their surrounding area. So all that is already there, but the app is being redeveloped as I'm speaking, and it will soon allow for much more. And I'm gonna come back to that point later on. For now, I just want to show you again this slide, just to reinforce the point that there are two single entry points. That's the basic gist of the Erasmus Without Paper infrastructure. One is for Erasmus coordinators, the other one is for students. So universities and students are covered, and they can both have a straightforward entry point for managing their mobilities. Now, I've been telling you about the things that have been in place now. Some of you may have heard about them before. What is new as of March 2020? Well, to begin with, the testing version of the Inter-Instituional Agreement Manager is already out. It was released on the 21st of February 2020, and it's right now being tested by different universities. Then, as I told you before, the Erasmus Plus app is being revamped. So it's a process that will take a couple of years, but later this year we'll be able to also release the new some of the new functionalities. The online learning agreement tool is also undergoing significant revamping, and I will get back to this later on. There is also this effort at putting together one single electronic identification scheme for higher education students in Europe, so that they can very easily authenticate online and access all these different tools. So the first question that you may have is, why do we need digital inter-institutional agreements? And here, allow myself to borrow again one of the slides that was prepared by the European Commission to explain this during the webinar that took place last week, and we're talking about March 2020. And where the Inter-Institutional Agreement Manager was explained and introduced by both the European University Foundation and the Directorate General for Education and Culture. So, of course, one of the main reasons to have digital institutional agreements is to save time, but also very important to keep information up to date for all the relevant parties, to be more responsive to new needs and ideas, and to make information a little bit more accessible to students. Now, this is the roadmap that has been established for the interinstitutional agreements. You may remember from the initial slides that the deadline there was 2021. So this breaks it down a little bit. So as I mentioned before, the beta version of the Interinstitutional Agreement Manager has already been launched. The Commission on the 19th of February sent a note to the Erasmus Plus national agencies to notify them on this. A little bit later on, sent also a newsletter. And on the 5th of March, the webinar took place to introduce it formally. I believe we had more than 1,500 attendees during the webinar, although the official number has not been released yet, as far as I'm concerned. And the point here is that between February and May, or the end of April rather, between February and the end of April, the Interinstitutional Agreement Manager is being tested by universities. The idea is that as of May, we will have incorporated all the feedback that the universities testing this tool will give us, and the institutional agreement manager will start supporting all the actual data and renewals of interinstitutional agreements. And the connection with the Erasmus Without Paper network will be live by then. From June on, there will be continuous development, of course, to make sure that the institutional agreement manager is well connected and integrated with the rest of the network, and of course to fix any possible bugs or glitches that come along the way. This is a slide that I also borrowed from the European Commission because they introduced some of the novelties of the new agreements. And here I'm talking about the templates that has already been released. And there are 4 key points there. So, of course, commitments to work together on implementing the priorities of the program, more practical information for coordinators and students, information on the possibility of hosting blended student mobility, and more transparency on the infrastructure and services that universities can make available for those students who have special needs. So you can find all the relevant information on the link below. And allow me to move on to what the new digital process will look like. So to begin with, of course, it's an attempt at getting rid of physical signatures. No more scanning, no more printing, no need to circulate fact sheets because things are going to be digitized. There will be one institutional account whereby the institution will be able to delegate roles and assign roles to different members of the staff dealing with student mobility, and delegate the signature of a legal representative to the right person within the staff. So all the institutional information will be filled in only once. The idea is that this general information that has nothing to do with the more sensitive parts of the interinstitutional agreements will not be, if you change it once, it will automatically be updated in all your interinstitutional agreements. So you don't have to do it one by one. So it will save you a lot of time. The cooperation conditions, of course, those are set in each interinstitutional agreement. And both parties, of course, sign digitally within the same system. So things get simplified. Now, you might be wondering, how can I test the interinstitutional agreement manager? Can I even test it myself? Of course you can. All you have to do is go to the Erasmus Without Paper dashboard, where it is now made available. You log in into it with your account, or you create one if you don't have one yet, and look for the interinstitutional agreement manager on the menu on your left. There you can already start assigning roles, and you can start playing a little bit with it. The idea now is that you get acquainted with the tool, that you give us your feedback, and that you let us know what you think about this new functionality of the dashboard. I'm including a link to the webinar that was held on the 5th of March, because there my colleagues from the European University Foundation explain step by step how exactly you can test this interinstitutional agreement manager and where to find all the relevant information and what to do. Now, just to sum it up, right now is that moment where we're testing the interinstitutional agreement manager. So what we would very much appreciate from your side is that you involve your colleagues in this testing process, that you inform your institutional leadership about this digital renewal that is coming into being, and also that this is a good moment for you to reflect on the interinstitutional agreements that you have had for the past years. What's the quality of those agreements? What has it worked out with your partner universities? And for this, I'm also including a link to what we call the aquatic tool, which can help you assess the quality of your partnerships. So, because if you're going to renew your institutional agreements, you want to make sure that you renew those that are actually working for your institution. And of course, once the testing period is over and the interinstitutional agreement manager is live, we of course encourage you to start renewing them online. And what if you have feedback? Well, please share with us. I believe that by the end of the testing period, the European Commission will send or share with you a survey so you can give back all the feedback that you have been collecting. Of course, you can always reach out to us through the Competence Centre, but you will for sure receive this more structured survey so you can communicate your feedback in a structured manner with us. Now, another key piece of information that I would like to share with you is the revamping of the Erasmus Plus mobile app. So as I said before, it will take a couple of years. Basically, the new version of the app will be able to provide all the key information that is needed before, during, and after the mobility period. And this not only for higher education students, but the ambition is to also make this available for vocational education and training, for Erasmus Mundus, which means going beyond Europe, and also for youth exchanges. And there will be virtual assistant provided throughout the whole mobility journey. Two key updates of the app will take place in November 2020 and in summer 2021, when more connections, more APIs will become available. The online learning agreement is also undergoing significant redevelopment, and the timeline is very similar to that of the Erasmus Plus mobile app. But some key takeaways is that the Online Learning Agreement Consortium is carrying out a feasibility study on the benefits that blockchain could bring to the online learning agreement architecture. And that involves, of course, the learning agreements that are signed online, the transcript of records, and recognition procedures. They're also discussing and analyzing how to go beyond Erasmus and beyond the EU, so they can cater as well for other kinds of student mobility and for student mobility that takes place outside of Erasmus and outside of European borders. GDPR compliance in this respect is also being taken into account and being studied very seriously. The transcript of records is also going to be part of this new project, and that already started. And workshops and trainings are being organized to keep stakeholders up to speed. And of course, synergies with other projects are also being explored, and this allows me to transition towards briefly mentioning MyAcademicID, which is this attempt at putting together a single European EID scheme for higher education. So the idea here is to allow students who go abroad to access electronic services using their existing institutional accounts. So without needing to create new accounts, and through a single login, they should be able to access services across institutions and across borders. Here is a little example of how this could work. So a student with their own electronic academic credentials powered through EduGain, they will be able to access different services related or useful for the student mobility through a single sign-on, and the service providers and the institutions will be able to trust this information coming from students. Now, another possible use case of this is that students, through their national EID, will also be able eventually to enroll at higher education institutions, doing away with paperwork and basically just authenticating online in a digital format. Institutions, of course, will be able to get this information from students about their own identity directly from the member states where the student comes from and from the required authorities. So for you to stay tuned, I encourage you to stay up to speed with the different Erasmus Goes digital events that we are organizing. You can see a little bit in gray those that have already taken place, the webinar on learning agreements and GDPR in January, the Erasmus Goes Digital Conference that we had in Luxembourg last month, and the webinar that took place last week on the Inter-Instituional Agreement Manager. The links are there for you to watch those sections of the webinar that are relevant to you. And coming up, there will be a webinar on blockchain synergies in the online agreement that I mentioned briefly before. We will, of course, make all the links available on our website as soon as we have set a date for that. And there is a big Erasmus Goes Digital Conference foreseen for June 2020 in Greece, in Thessaloniki. So I encourage you to stay up to speed so you can attend these events and you can be informed of what's coming up and what you can already make use for. And before closing up this little video, I just want to acknowledge all the partners, all the people who have been behind each of these projects. They are all bottom up and they are all made by universities for universities, and they of course would not be possible without their help. These are the partners behind the redevelopment of the Erasmus Plus mobile app. You can see there, of course, ESN and LT University, who is taking the lead there. And I would, of course, like to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I leave you there with some very useful links to the different resources that you can access. I hope that we can all keep on going together forward for digitalization of the program. Thank you very much.